All right, 6:30 on the dot. We'll get things going. Just introduce ourselves and what we're hosting this evening. But those of you that have joined sessions before, joining us for the first time, we believe very strongly in education and providing information to make our clients informed when they're out there making decisions. Our focus very much is on getting people to and through retirement planning. And at that point, we've talked before about our kind of pillars of working with Social Security planning, Medicare planning, tax planning, and retirement, long-term care planning. But we'd be remiss if we didn't also bring into the loop something like estate planning, which is why we have tonight, we have Ken Simmons and Marco Schiavo from Simmons and Schiavo, attorneys at law, joining us, as you can see in their background, estate planning, wealth preservation, and elder law. So two gentlemen that are absolutely well qualified to have a conversation tonight with us, which is what we're looking to do, is really just have a conversation around an area that comes up quite often in our meetings with our clients. And at the end of the day, honestly, is a very crucial part to those pillars we were talking about of getting you to and through retirement. We could execute upon all those other areas, but if we don't have a proper estate plan as well, there's a lot of things that could be coming apart there. So I guess as I get things started here, thank you both, Ken and Marco, for joining us.
Yeah, our pleasure. Thank you.
Yep. So
Thank you.
Topic we want to talk about tonight. I mean, talking about estate planning and try to keep it, I guess, a little high level and talking about some of the basics and things and just giving people some good foundational information so that they can kind of get to the next layer in questions. So we find often that estate planning comes up in conversations. The word trust is also something that I feel a lot of people are familiar with the word and hear it, and sometimes it's tossed around in a way that we have people approach us say that I need a trust. I've been told I need a trust. We ask why or what, and they don't necessarily know the answers behind that. So that's something I do know that we want to explore a little bit. But before we get into that, can we just talk a little bit about just, I guess, estate planning in general and what that is and where that journey should start?
Marco, you want to take
Sure. Sure, absolutely. So estate planning, we're really addressing a few different situations. So the first situation that we address is incapacity. So what happens in the event where you're mentally incapacitated? Who is making your medical decisions, right? Who's making your financial decisions? And so we want to choose people there that we trust to make decisions in our place because we are unable to make those decisions ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And then on a high level, that's what we're addressing during incapacity. And then we're also addressing what happens when someone dies. Where do the assets go and who are the beneficiaries and how are they receiving the assets? And we'll talk more about the different options that are available to people in terms of distribution to their beneficiaries.
Yeah, and I think to your question about where do you start, I think it's always just sort of an open discussion about what you, the client, are worried about, like what's prompting you to do your planning at this point in time.
Right.
What are the sensitive areas we need to dig into, and just sort of understanding the goals of doing the planning for each person, and maybe providing information about some ideas that might help with that, how we solve those problems, ease those worries. And because it's not one size fits all. And I think for us to present to someone the right structure, we really have to understand what problems are we trying to solve.
Right. Right. Absolutely right. You got to begin with the kind of the end in mind, right? What's the purpose here? What are we driving towards before you can do that?
Mm-hmm.
We like to say a lot, plan for the best, protect for the worst. Kind of like Marco saying, life can throw a curveball at you. And if there's not something in place, then what? So I know we do that a lot with our planning as well, as try to see, where are those potential holes, where could things kind of go awry? And it sounds like the estate plan is part of that. I guess aligning actions with your intentions. Like you might have plans or what you'd wish, but if it's not if it's not drafted, then how and who would know what to do?
Right. Yep.
Right?
Exactly.
Okay, great. So when we talk about that, so what happens if there's a failure to have a plan, or what if there's not a plan in place, or I guess what is the I guess how much of a priority or importance is this plan?
Mm-hmm.
There's always a plan in place. So the
Okay.
state has a plan for you if you don't have a plan.
Okay.
So on the disability side, right, someone would have to petition to be named the healthcare proxy, the person to make medical decisions. So the guardian, as we call it.
And petition.
Someone has to
So
petition the
petition.
court. It's through a petition. It's through a process. And on the financial side, it's through a conservatorship. So there's another process that's done to manage assets if someone's incapacitated.
Mhm.
And then when someone dies, there's also a probate process that has to be followed if there's no plan in place.
Mhm.
And then the state has even further, the state has a distribution pattern for you that may not match what your intentions are. So
And it
there
sounds
is
like it would probably take some time as well, talking about these petitions and process.
I mean, I think, when you get into not having a plan, right, there's always a way to solve the problem.
Right.
Just where by default choosing the most difficult path to resolve it, and that's generally the court system. But, you start to lose other things too. You start to run into maybe not the right people doing it that you may have chosen.
Right, Marco was saying, right? Yeah.
You're going to lose privacy because now it's a public process in the court system. Anybody can see what's going on. And
Mhm.
then deeper into it, you're going to have probably costly tax problems and inefficiencies that going through the court system on a default structure is going to lead to.
Right.
So there's a host of things that start to come up in getting from A to B that are very solvable and very manageable with the right paperwork.
Okay. Right. Because I mean, everyone, it's not that they're looking to make things difficult, and there is at least a process there, right? And there is a way to get through it. But like you're saying, it's probably not the most efficient. And usually most of us like to make our own, have our own priorities or decisions or choices we like to make in our lives. So the likelihood that they're going to know all those personal feelings and your personal situation to make the, aligned choices for you is maybe hopeful. Not saying that they're going to try to mess it up or not do their best, but at the same time, it might not be aligned, right?
Hmm. Hmm. And
and you're leaving a lot of headaches.
Yeah.
You're leaving a lot of headaches for your beneficiaries because you're forcing them to go through this process that could have been avoided very easily through some preparation and planning ahead of time.
I find that often those are some of the first people that come to look to say, I need to do an estate plan, is sometimes the people that were left to, I don't necessarily I'll call it a mess, but have had to go through the process that you were describing and are saying, I do not want to leave this for anyone else. So they're usually looking. It's usually that in care situations as well, as where people have personal experience and they say, okay, I need to plan for this.
Right.
So okay, so we're talking a little bit about the estate planning in general and the maybe the importance of it or the necessity for making taking action if it's something that you want to prioritize your choice. And then talking about some of the maybe just some of the terms and things that get tossed around. I feel people might be familiar with some and maybe some more detail and less than others, but I find, will is a common phrase, I feel like for most people in a household, they've heard it.
Mhm.
Trust, again, maybe a common word that they have heard in different frames, but can you go into those just a little bit with us too?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so I think I'll probably start with a will. That's the most familiar term people have heard.
Mhm.
In simple terminology, it's just written down who you want to handle your affairs and where you want things to go. And really it's nuts and bolts,
Yeah.
properly executed. But I think the misconception is doing a will in and of itself does not, avoid the court system. It does not validate the will. It's sort of, you've got this writing that's pending a court process down the road to
Okay.
validate it and carry it out. And that's probate. But the will is at least documenting your choices with those two big things. Who's going to handle it and where's it going to ultimately go? And so wills, generally very straightforward, shorter documents, not a lot of bells and whistles. It's just, those key directions.
It's similar to naming a beneficiary on an account or something like that.
In a way it is, and it's really saying, well, anything that goes through court, this will be the beneficiary of that process.
Okay.
So in that regard, yeah, it is like naming a beneficiary, but it's not an asset specific one. It's more a probate specific one.
Okay.
Now, when you shift to the idea of a trust, the way I work with clients or kind of conceptualize it is we're going to build them a box. And we're going to put stuff in that box, maybe their home, bank accounts, things like that. They are holding and in charge of the box. It's them. So my
Okay.
wife and I have a trust. We're trustees. We're beneficiaries. It's our stuff. We just wrapped it up in a box. When we pass away, the box gets passed to someone else who's the trustee. They're in charge of the box at that point.
Okay.
And their
The
job,
trustee is someone that's going to be in charge of the box.
yep.
Okay.
And their job is to follow the directions that we wrote in there. The basic direction is, distribute the assets to our children.
Okay. So what's in the box? Here's where to send those.
Right. Exactly. But because we put it in this box, we don't need to rely on the court system, or we don't need any outside help. We can just follow what was written in there and empty the box out per its terms. So in some regards, it's similar to what people might think about as an executor or personal representative. That's a will person or a court person.
Okay.
Trustee is doing similar things, just privately, efficiently, and outside the court.
Okay.
So that's sort of at least how I envision it and how I describe it to folks when we're working through it.
And so versus the what we went through before with the probate process. So now it's private, right? It's your box, you've written, and hopefully the other individuals that are involved, the trustees, are aware that they are trustees, and we can talk a little bit maybe about that as well, of these other things, the trustees and beneficiaries, and picking and choosing who these people, what makes the most sense there. But so the trust is a box, and now are there different types of boxes?
Yes, Mark, you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. So on a high level, yes, there are two different types of trusts. One is a revocable trust and one is an irrevocable trust.
Okay.
So that's sort of the first level, right? What type of trust do we want? And those can accomplish very different goals. For example, if the idea, well, a revocable trust that allows you to have full control, that is not right for that type of situation, right? We would be looking at an irrevocable trust, a trust that can't be changed, where someone simply keeps the income, right? And no access to principal. Or if the goal is to reduce the size of someone's estate, we're doing some tax planning, we want to reduce the size of an estate, that's where irrevocable trusts are used. Gifting trusts, for example, where we're trying to reduce the size of the estate for tax purposes, that's where irrevocable trusts can be used. Revocable and irrevocable, and then on the revocable side, that is where generally where I say I want to keep control and I want to make sure that when I die, we're avoiding probate. And in that, now we can, in both trusts, we can do tax planning and we can accomplish other goals in those. But on a higher level, those are the two types of boxes.
Now, would you, when you think of those two type boxes, so when we say the kind of revocable, you're keeping control of that. Is that kind of, you're still holding that box? And then when you do something like in irrevocable, I mean, would you say you're no longer really holding the box? Is at that point? Is it someone else? You're kind of handing that box off to someone already at that point in time?
Yeah, I think that's a good description, Mike. Like I created it and I handed it over to my sister. Say, hey, I want you to
someone you trust, right? Someone you trust, hold this for me. It's important.
Yeah, I'm still connected to it.
Yeah.
It's not really mine, but I still have a little bit of a connection, but you got to hold it for me.
Okay.
That's irrevocable.
Yeah.
Big decisions there and who that is and all that.
Right.
But revocable, I'll say to like my sister, in the future, you're going to hold this on my death. Then it's going to pass to you. But while I'm well and alive, I got it. That's mine.
And so as we're talking about the different boxes, I'm assuming this is part of that initial conversation that you're saying things have to start with to know, okay, what are we looking for? What type of box? Do we need a box? What type of box do we need? What should be in this box? Who should be holding this box? Those are all
Correct.
things that come through the conversation, like you're saying. So someone doesn't have to come in and say, I need this or I need that to you.
No, to be truthful, like we really want it the opposite. Like
Okay.
we want to kind of hear what they're worried about and then navigate to, well, how do we solve those problems?
Right.
As opposed to if someone comes in and says, I need a trust, my first question is, how come? Like what, it's because my neighbor has one and they said I should do it.
Uh-huh.
But
I
very
hear
well,
that every now and then. Yes.
yeah, they very well might need that.
Hmm.
We want to navigate so that the client knows and has kind of digested, yeah, this is the right solution and I understand why it is, versus, I just got to have it. So what we kind of work through when we sit down with people and, do you need a box and why?
Mhm.
Then my other analogy is it's like tools in a toolbox. What does this trust need to do?
Yep.
My trust might be much simpler and not need as many tools in it as, Warren Buffett's trust,
I know. Saw some headlines with that recently, right? Even when you think you got a solid estate plan, still there could be some issues, right? Hmm.
So it's very much
And
specific to the client. Go ahead, Marco. Sorry.
yeah, and sometimes, so to go one step further, sometimes it involves two boxes, right? One that's revocable, one that's irrevocable.
Right. So
And
you
now
need just have
we're
one.
putting certain assets in one box and certain assets in another. Again, we really need to have that conversation with what are your goals? What are you looking to accomplish? If you have multiple goals, maybe the way to resolve those multiple goals is to have separate buckets.
Right. Different tools for different jobs at the end of the day, like you were
Exactly.
saying as well. Great. So at the end of the day, someone really needs to be looking at that conversation. It sounds like this would also be a key reason why coming into professionals like yourselves to have that conversation to make sure you're aligning those choices versus sometimes if you go out there and think you're I don't know, kind of Amazon shopping for your estate plan. Making sure you know what you're actually really looking for or shopping for before it shows up and it's not exactly what I thought it was what I was intending to get, or it didn't exactly work the way I thought it was gonna work.
And I think that's, a key point, Mike, is if you went online and got a will,
Right.
a client will ask, is that a valid will? Probably.
Mhm.
I'm not going to say it's a great one, but is it valid? Yeah. But is it the right thing to have? Like, should you be doing something else? So just
Mhm.
having that checkbox, oh, I have a will. Yep. Okay, you might, but it may not really be doing what you think it's doing or should be doing.
Right. Is it really aligned with that purpose, that end in mind, what you're wishing and wanting it to do?
Right.
Great. I love that there's always a lot of overlap and similarity to our approaches with things as well. And everything I think really does just start with a good, honest conversation of talking about what the ultimate purpose, the wants, the needs, the concerns, the goals, all of it together. And that's where your role is to then help align that for the clients.
Mhm.
Great. As we're talking kind of about the trust, can you go into a little bit more of maybe the importance of those decisions of who would be involved? We named some terms like executor when we were speaking of the wills. We mentioned trustee. We've said the word beneficiary kind of loosely as well, of just talking about what those and who, I guess if they are a person or what those are.
Marco, if it's okay, I'll take the
Yeah.
trustee part and you want to take the beneficiary part.
Sure.
Split it up.
Sure. Absolutely.
So in terms of the trustee, this is a really interesting conversation with many people, because a lot of times the default will be, well, I've got 4 kids, I'm going to have my oldest child be the trustee.
Mhm.
And I get it, sort of just human nature to kind of go that route.
Mhm.
But
Default voice, yeah.
but we try to prod a little bit and dig in about, what are the circumstances for the kids, if they're going to be involved.
Mhm.
In terms of, what kind of job do they have? How busy are they? Where do they live? What's their skill set? Because someone that's got, 4 young kids and lives in California, they may not be the best person for this role if something happened tomorrow because time constraints, right?
Right, how they pick up and leave, right?
Can they do this? And it's a responsibility, it's a job. It's not, something you do half hour once a week when you're in this role.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those variables come into it. Personality. Can they work with the siblings? Does everyone get along? Or are we going to have a conflict and a dynamic issue here where we're setting the family up for really more problems than we're solving? And should we have a third party do, whether it's an outside family member, an attorney who
Mm-hmm.
kind of has the job of administering the estate, separate from the beneficiary component?
Right, so no conflicts of interest or anything like that, and none of those relationship constraints as well. Yep.
And the example I'll use, like if we had a beneficiary that was, say, pushing for their inheritance, if it's their brother that's they think holding it up, that's going to cause a deterioration in the relationship.
Yeah, you can see the tension, right?
But if it's me holding it up, okay, they might not be happy with me, but their family relationship's not going to be disturbed by it. So there's sort of a deeper conversation about how everything works within the family. Again, I'm making the assumption it's children, but it could be grandchildren, nieces, nephews, whoever it might be,
Right.
that we really need to understand before we just say, all right, first, oldest person, you're going to be in charge.
So that's part of the conversation. That's something that you do assist with, because I can imagine for a number of people that is well, it can be probably a challenging thing to explore on your own, to think of where and who is that trusted person, or how should I set this up?
Right. And one thing, as Marco and I have practiced longer and longer, I'm very quick to tell people, you're not rewarding this person with the job. It's work, it's stress, there's
Responsibility.
and so, skipping them, you know, you're almost doing them a favor in many ways, because it can be a responsibility that they're just not ready to handle.
Yeah.
So that's part of that. And the one that's a little distinct, I would say, just to draw the point, is the
Yeah.
healthcare decision making. That's, it's not a financial decision. That's much more emotionally charged. It's a different stress that maybe a very different person with a very different skill set and a different relationship to the client.
So that could be, when we're talking about, so this could be someone entirely different than this. Doesn't have to be the trustee of your trust and who's in charge of your medical decisions. These could be different people.
Right.
Yes.
Absolutely. And, our approach is, someone like Marco or I or a professional really wouldn't be a medical decision maker, because you have to have a real personal knowledge of someone's wishes and feelings on that stuff. And we get to know people well, but that's at a different level. And that's generally when we can utilize it a family situation, and who within the family is really comfortable with that. And that's a conversation they have to have too,
Right.
with that person. So these roles, these hats that people are wearing, the medical one's very unique and distinct.
Right.
Trustee, these other ones are kind of grouped under a financial element to it. And it's a very different skill set that we might be looking at based on, what the plan is.
Right. So you're, like, as you're saying, so through a conversation, you might identify that this would be the perfect person for this role, this would be the perfect person for that role, or here's we can narrow it down to maybe these few that you're thinking of. Great.
Yeah. And then on beneficiaries, I'll let Marco kind of speak.
Yeah, on the beneficiary side, so sometimes I'll sit down with a client and we'll start talking about concerns, and a question they have is, well, what do you have set up for your family? How does it work? And so I will really, stress the fact that we're in very different scenarios, right? So I have a wife and young children, and maybe this person across the table has a blended family, has a child with a substance abuse problem, and is worth 5 times what I'm worth. Like, that plan that I have in place is very different from the plan that they would have in place. So things that we can address as we look at beneficiaries, we say, tell me about your beneficiary. Okay, I want to leave this to my children. Okay, great. Tell me about your children. Okay, I have one child who's very responsible, not worried. They're in a long-term marriage, not worried about them. I have another child who they were just recently married. We don't know how that's going. So far, so good. It's they've only been married for 2 years. And then I have my youngest who has had some drug problems in the past. Right now they're clean, but some concerns there. Okay, so maybe we want to treat those beneficiaries very differently. There's nothing that says you have to treat all of your children equally. There's nothing that says you have to distribute to them in equal shares. And you can, and we've seen it different ways, right? And so you could say, I leave more to one child, more to the other. I've helped one child purchase a home and I haven't helped the other one. So we can address that through allocations, but more the beneficiaries and their needs. So if there's a concern where an inheritance would be used to address a substance abuse problem, used for drugs and alcohol, or squandered because the person has a gambling issue or just a spendthrift, we want to address that through their plan. And so we look at every individual beneficiary and what are their needs and what are the concerns of the client and in the receipt of their inheritance, the money that they're leaving as an inheritance for their beneficiaries. And then we address the drafting very differently for those beneficiaries. Then we also have blended families where the situation is there is a house that I brought into the marriage from my prior marriage, and in that divorce, I got the house. And now I'm remarried, but I have children from my prior relationship. So I want to make sure that my spouse is able to use that house and benefit from that house because we've been together for many years. But upon that spouse's death, I don't want it to go to his or her children. I want that to come back and go to my children. And so how do we do that? We address that through the trust. So in deciding how to leave our assets and who to leave them to, these are the concerns that we need to address.
So again, back to the conversation of if they're identifying who those beneficiaries are and you're helping them to align with, okay, how's the best way to allocate things, or in what way should they be receiving or not receiving things, right? So they continue to care, protect, generally do the things that they want to do with their legacy. And so it sounds like obviously some situations could be more complex than others, family dynamics and everything. At the same time, if someone didn't, if you have a more complex, if it is a mixed family or second marriage, and I feel we have a number of clients that's a common situation, and very much they're married now with someone, they've been with them for years, but at one point they were both married to someone else, they both have separate children. Can you go into a little bit of that and of what the what's the default there? Like if you didn't have an estate plan and you have like you were saying, there's always a plan. So if you haven't written the plan, what can you go into that a little bit more? What is the default situation?
We see that often. We see
Right.
that very often where people will acquire assets. We had people today that we met with where they acquire assets and they buy them jointly. They buy a home and they buy it jointly. They have investment accounts and it's joint. Now that money now goes to the survivor of the two of them. And then when the survivor dies, now it's going only to that survivor's children and beneficiaries on that side,
Just
as
based on the
opposed to
order
being
of
right. So
gotcha.
that's the way that Massachusetts has it, where it's going to the survivor's beneficiaries. So lack of proper planning, that's the result. And so when we address that with a client, we said, this is what, or prospective client, this is what the state allows. If that's not how you want it, let's talk about that and address it through your plan.
Okay, great. And then as we talked about I guess some of these different roles, the individuals, and getting back to like the trust in the boxes for a moment here. 'Cause I feel, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when people approach us asking or looking and considering estate plan, they're usually coming from two two perspectives on the why I need a trust. Sometimes it's thinking of care in the future and thinking and knowing, okay, something with a trust, just something with that I'm supposed to have to help me with if I need care at some point in the future. That's usually one of the situations, right, that will arise. Others are the estate tax, an
Yeah.
estate tax, and someone that's thinking, okay, I mean, especially in Massachusetts where, property values and things, it's very, 'cause what's the current estate tax limit in Massachusetts? It's
To 2 million.
right? So I mean, now and it's amazing with some of the home values that still is the values where it's at. I feel like Massachusetts estate tax, there must be a number of people that are at that threshold.
Mhm. Yeah, it doesn't, it's not hard to hit it for a lot of folks that have a home that's paid for and have an IRA or some life insurance.
Right.
Because when we're determining if Massachusetts is going to tax an estate, it's
Mhm.
all of those things are counting. Anything you can touch counts. So death benefit on life insurance, IRA, bank accounts, home. Even if it doesn't go through court, it's all counted towards your value and whether or not you cross that $2 million threshold. So, it was worse 2 years ago when the threshold was 1 million.
Mhm.
So there was a nice improvement when they doubled it.
Right.
It's still awfully low relative to, wealth in the state, and even in relation to other states where I believe either lowest or second lowest in the country. So, it's still hitting a lot of people, a lot of.
Right.
So that's a big part of a lot of trust planning that we're doing, is because we're in Massachusetts and we have this low threshold,
Mhm.
trying to minimize the impact of that through how a trust can operate at death.
Okay. So legally, we're trying to make sure that we're holding on to as much of our money as we can, right?
Mhm.
We tell our clients about, we like to help you make money, but we also like to help you keep it as much as we can. Not that we don't want to, support, pay, our fair share of tax, but to make sure we're doing the proper planning to not pay more than that when you work so hard. So it sounds like it is something though that through some planning there could be some ways to mitigate the estate tax problem.
Mhm. Yeah.
And then as far as care planning and care in the future, that as well.
Yeah, so that's going to lead more to the Marco's note of irrevocable trust planning.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so if we have a client and they're facing or concerned about facing a care concern in the future, and in other words, the nursing home costs 16,000 a month, I don't want all my assets depleted.
Right.
Well, we need to find a way to properly move those assets so that they don't all count towards that care.
Right.
And irrevocable trusts are a way that we can move some assets
Mm-hmm.
into that box. And as long as enough time has gone by, which currently is 5 years,
Mm-hmm.
then that box doesn't count towards what's needed to be spent on someone's long-term care, and opens the door potentially for Mass Health, Medicaid to help pay those costs in the future.
Okay. It's just more options. And it sounds like I mean the 5 years. So um planning ahead there. And I think even going back to maybe how Marco even started this off, talking about planning for incapacity or illness. A lot of these things are sometimes things that can come on very suddenly, right, and out of the blue. So sounds like proper planning is essentially the planning before there's a need
Mm.
for the plan. It's trying to get that maybe that urgency, which again, hopefully this information that we're sharing tonight and having this conversation as well is just one of those things to get some of the stuff that sometimes is put on the back burner by many of us to that front burner and give it the focus and attention and priority that it needs and deserves.
Mm.
So thank you for spending the time with this as well.
Yeah, yeah.
What else? Anything else that you think we should touch upon or cover in general?
Well, I think we've kind of done a lot of talking about trust. So I want to emphasize two key things when people do a trust.
Okay.
When we build the box and we have all these conversations and we end up with a document that's reflecting all of that,
Mm-hmm.
what sometimes doesn't get done properly is connecting all of the assets that you have to that box.
You
And
got to put
so,
stuff in the box, right? Otherwise,
Otherwise, it's just an empty box and it's not doing what it's supposed to do. So we spend a lot of time, with financial advisors, helping, having you guys help us. All right, we got to move the client's assets or retitle them and update beneficiaries so that now we've got a box not only that reads right, but is holding everything so that we're using it at that future point in time appropriately and properly and really maximizing its purpose.
Okay.
So that needs to be done. That's an important part.
They have to be aligned.
Yeah. And then secondly, which is a big component of our discussions with people, once we do all that, you can't just ignore it for 10 years and hope that it's still all in good order.
Right.
The law's changing, your assets are changing, your family situation might be changing, and a plan that's 10 years old might not match up to what you have happening at that point in time.
Right.
So sort of regular, review, we call it our client care program, but regular touch points to make sure that all this hard work you did stays proper going forward.
Yeah, you got to do the maintenance on it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think those are two key parts that, sometimes there's such a relief that it's done when people sign. There's a natural inclination just to say, all right,
We finished it.
to-do
We
list.
did it.
And I totally understand that, but I think we try to encourage people to be, not thinking about it every day, but just being proactive with sort of touch points and establishing a good relationship so that it stays up to date.
Cognizant of it, right? And I think that's where sometimes the alignment between different professionals can be helpful in that manner as well, making sure things are probably updated or funded, or bringing some of those things to surface, and sharing information, with the clients of, hey, this might be worth reaching out to your the attorneys to give them the update on this change, because as you mentioned, it could be estate tax that moves or changes. It could be, as we were going through, the family dynamics that are ever evolving and changing. I can't imagine it's possible to write a document and then do all the ifs and this and thens and that's that would be necessary to map out all the potential evolutions in someone's life and dynamics from the beginning. So making sure those aligned. And we actually had someone that attended a Social Security seminar with us this year. It was in April, and one of the things that they had actually come up in conversation very much was they did sadly realize in a not opportune time they had done all their estate planning, which is right. I mean, the drafting and going through this conversation, it's an important thing. So you spend time with it, you're going through it, they completed all of it, but they never actually funded it. They never aligned the assets with it. And it wasn't until something had popped up that brought that to light that there was a kind of a scramble, that happens at that point in time. Because like you said, it is something that people kind of feel you reach that finish line, but you got to make sure you make that final step. So it's great that you help with that and following up with people to make sure they do take that step, and that then you have a program as well to support them ongoingly, right? To make sure this is not a set it and forget it. We do the same with our plans. It's just there's no way life is ever evolving and weaving and changing. So you have to make sure you're keeping up with things.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah, we see that scenario all the time. People have great trusts that they've done at a big firm, and the documents are fine, but there's nothing in the trust. So now what they've paid, what we joke with people is say, look, you paid for a very expensive will, because all those assets that you have now are still going through probate. And that's so the point is to avoid that. So we actually do that. We make sure that those assets are all in the trust, properly funded, to make sure that that we have for an easy distribution.
Got the instructions before, and make sure that the proper instructions from you and your team to make sure we align everything with it and keep those updated. Because at the end of the day, the best laid plans, right? But we have to we got to make sure we can actually have the things there when we do need them to perform. So thank you again for the time this evening. I don't know if there's any closing comments or anything that either one of you has at all. If not, I can wrap us up.
No, I think that was good questions, and so we're always happy to talk to people. So
great,
thank you.
Greatly appreciate it.
One other thing that I don't think we did touch upon. So we talked about nursing home planning, we talked about tax planning, but different scenarios for beneficiaries. One thing that we didn't talk about is special needs planning. So people who have a beneficiary who has special needs, they absolutely need to consider doing an estate plan. Because if you have a beneficiary who has special needs, who's receiving any type of government assistance, SSI, for example, if they were to receive an inheritance, they may lose those benefits.
Right.
So we can protect those benefits and so they can continue to receive government benefits and still receive an inheritance. So
Right.
we didn't touch upon that. That's the only other thing that I would consider
Yeah, no, I think very,
talking about that we
yeah,
didn't
very,
touch upon.
very important. And I think you, like you're saying, beyond that, just someone that's been caring for someone, maybe you know, a child through adult child throughout their lives, and then when you're just making sure how do they continue to provide that care in the future when they're no longer there, you know, physically to make it happen. So can imagine that someone really would want to be taking those steps to do so. So Ken and Marco, thank you. For
pleasure.
everyone that's looking for any more information, I mean, I know we do, we pass along your information when people come and ask for estate planning with us, but your website is also fantastic, sslawoffices.com. Great resources on there, easy to contact them, see some testimonials from clients as well. They have a lot of good information and resources that I honestly point to as just a reference point for people that are looking or have some questions and want to explore a little more, and you make yourselves very accessible. We didn't mention it as well, but they're actually right in our building and right down the hall on the same floor as us in our office. So if you have been up to our office there, they're right down about 2 or 3 doors down. So thank you everyone for the time this evening. Hopefully this
Thank
was some good information and just gives you that platform to jump off from and take care of your personal planning. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mike.
Take
All
care.
right, thank you.
Night.